Hey friends! A question I get asked all the time is all questions about designing. And I wanted to do a fun video on anybody who is inspiring to be a knitwear designer, who wishes maybe in the future, or you just kind of want to know about behind the scenes. So stick around and let's dive right into if you want to become a knitwear designer. Alright, so in this video I'm going to be going over some of the key points, questions that I get asked all the time, and then around the end I am going to be letting you know kind of my process personally on how I design patterns. So the first question I get asked is, how do you find inspiration? Like, how do you get started? Inspiration is really different for every single designer. It really depends on where you like to find inspiration. You can find it outside. You could find it in a children's book. For an example, for me, 2-3 years ago, I was reading one of the girls' books, and there was these really fun polar bears, and I designed the polar bear socks. For this sweater example, that it was little tiny trees. Me and my husband were walking and there was these little trees in the trails that were a little covered with snow. Winter trees. So it really depends on the designer and where you can find inspiration. It can come from anywhere. So one of the things that I would highly recommend is that you just get a notebook. And this could be, you know, just blank pages, and you carry around with you. Whenever you find that an inspiration hits, it could be great. Pinterest is also a great way to find some inspiration. You could see even around you when you go to the mall, you can say, oh, I kind of like that sweater or that pair of socks, but I really would have changed this and this. You want to make sure that when you are designing that you are not copying anybody. You don't want to go and say, this is a commercial sweater, I'm going to copy it to the T. That is not designing. That is copying. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is unique. Another way that I would highly recommend, when you find an inspiration, go on Ravelry. Make sure that another designer hasn't already done it. That's happened a few times where I've wanted to design something and I go on Ravelry and I search and I think, oh fudge, somebody else has already done that. You want to make sure that your design is unique, that you are not taking, for example, my pattern. And you say, well, I like that one, but I want to make it cropped. You can't go and steal all of the information and math and things and say, oh, I just made it cropped, here's a pattern. You can't do that. You need to make sure that your inspiration comes from you and not somebody else's pattern. So that's really important to keep in mind. So yeah, so that would be my number one thing, is that inspiration can come from anywhere, but please make sure that is from you and you are not stealing. Number two, how on earth do you grade sweater patterns? This one is a huge one. It's hard, okay? I'm not gonna lie, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Grading patterns is hell and hard, but you do have some resources out there. The Craft Yarn Council has kind of the bust measurements, arm measurements, and things for average sizes. I want to say they go from, for adults, they go from a 30-32 bust all the way to a 60-62 inch. So it really goes approximately from an extra small all the way to a 5 extra large. They have those there. Use those tools. There is not a course per se on, here you go, here is how you are going to design everything from A to Z. Designers really do a lot of research on their own. They figure things out. They figure out their gauge and how they like patterns to fit. But the other thing that I will say, Google. If you are unsure about anything, use Google. It is your best friend, and YouTube. If you're not sure about short rows, Google short rows. If you're not sure on what different cast-ons to use, Google different cast-ons. A lot of designers, I'm gonna give you a little behind the tips, we Google like crazy. We try and find all of the resources and all of the information by ourselves. We don't go up to somebody else and say, hey, can you give me all of this? Because we work very hard behind the scenes on figuring all of those out. For the math, a lot of different people use different things. I use an Excel sheet or numbers in Apple. and I go from there. I look at the gauge and I measure everything out. I use Excel sheets, populate, and go from there. I will also mention that you want to make sure that you get a tech editor to look over your numbers and your test knitters. But first off, get a good tech editor. The third question I get asked all the time is, do you really need a tech editor and test knitters? Yes, to both. When you are first starting out, you want to make sure that somebody else is looking over the pattern that you are writing. For me, my pattern writing, I just use Keynote in Apple, and I kind of have my basic formula that I have designed that I like my patterns to be written on. You can design whatever pattern that you like, the aesthetic and the fonts, all of that. That's all up to you. So a tech editor is someone that you pay that will look over your pattern for you. Depending on the tech editor, they have different fees. That is all based on the tech editor's cost. Some charge a flat rate, some charge per hour. There is a great Ravelry forum in Ravelry. If you look, I think it's like designers, you will find a thread that has a ton of people offering their tech editing services. Get in touch with them. Figure out if you guys mesh well together. So a tech editor is going to look over your math if you ask them to. They will look over your grammar. They will look over to make sure if your numbers are making sense, your formatting. They will check all of this out and they will give you a revision. You go through, send it back for a final revision, and then you send it off to your test knitters. Test knitters are doing the pattern as well in their own yarn. You do not pay them. Test knitters are offering to also look over the pattern but actually knit up a sample for themselves. And this will ensure that it helps you to make sure that, one, the pattern actually makes sense, two, that the pattern fits depending on what you're doing, if you're doing garments, and three, it actually gives you great promotion and advertising because your test knitters are going to be posting on their project and are going to be referring back to you. So when you have your project in Ravelry or your website, you can have the test knitters link their projects so that people can say, okay, well, I love the sample, but how did other people do it? Or how do other people look in different sizes? And that's when your test knitters really come in handy. For all of my pattern test knitters, I provide them with the PDF of the final pattern, as well as they get one extra pattern if they meet all of the requirements from my shop. So that is how I pay my test knitters, is I just give them another free pattern. But typically a test knitter, you do not get any payment per se, but a tech editor you do, because a tech editor is actually providing a service. Compared to a test knitter, you can just test knit some fun patterns and you get a full pattern out of it. All right, woo! That was a lot of information. The other question I get asked all the time is, what do you use for your charts? How do you figure out charts? I use Stitch Mastery. Stitch Mastery is an online program that you pay a one-time fee and that you get for a lifetime. I absolutely love Stitch Mastery, and I think that their tools are very easy to use, simple. I use it for my color work, I use it for cables and lace and all of that. So I think that they are a great resource, and every designer should have Stitch Mastery. It is absolutely amazing. You'll put in whatever chart that you have and it will actually auto-populate the written instructions for you. Amazing. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend, if you are wanting to get into knitwear design, get Stitch Mastery. It is probably like one of my favorite purchases that I've made. Another question that I got asked was, how do you make your photos look pretty? Look, I'm gonna tell you that I take all of my photos with my phone. I just have an iPhone and I take all of my photos. I edit them in Lightroom. Lightroom on your phone is free. I just edit them in Lightroom and have fun with it. If I'm doing any fun thumbnails or things like that, I use Canva, and that gives me a ton of templates, and there are some that are free as well on Canva, and you can pay a membership and get, or a monthly fee, and get access to a ton more libraries. So depending on what you're looking for, you can either go with the free option or you can go with the paid for version. Now let me see if I got some more questions. I put a fun poll this morning and you guys have been really asking a lot of good questions. All right, so what do you think catches the eyes of your public or patterns or make them more accessible? Do not design patterns for other people. That is probably like something you're gonna be like, what, Julie? What did you just say? Do not design for other people, design for yourself. Because in the long run, you want to be able to love and enjoy the process of what you're making. And if you're not designing something that you actually like, and that's for you, and you're trying to please other people, it won't work. It just won't work. I'm not going to be designing things that I don't want to design. I don't want to be knitting on things that I don't want to be knitting. This is also my craft that I enjoy. So I want to make sure that the things that I knit and design, for an example, this sweater, I love and I'm going to wear it. Because that's the fun about designing. Don't do it for the money. Don't do it for the free yarn. Do it because you want to do it. So definitely go it on that end. Make sure that you do it for yourself. And if other people love it, then great. You will get a following of people that actually like the same things that you are liking, which are way better than trying to design patterns for other people and having an audience that isn't really responding to you. Stick true to yourself. Design the things that you love with yarns that you love, and you will automatically find people that have that same interest. And that's the fun about designing, is that there are so many different knitwear designers. We all have our own unique style and we all have our own unique audience. So the people that I'm designing for are not going to be the same people as another designer. So it's really fun and interesting. So don't try and please other people. Do it for yourself and you're going to enjoy it a lot more in the long run. The next question I get asked often is, how do I work with big yarn companies? How do I approach them and how do I get free yarn? Now, one of the things to remember is it is not free yarn. You are providing a service for that yarn. A lot of these yarn companies are expecting you to design something with the yarn that they provide you. You can request that yarn and tell them what exactly you need, but you need to design, knit, showcase, tech edit, get it test knit, and publish it out there. So don't ever think of it as free yarn. It is the supplies for what you are doing, for your cost. When you are wanting to work with a big yarn company, the number one thing that I would tell you and suggest is do not go and send them a direct message. A lot of the times the person answering the direct messages are not the same person actually going for the submission calls or the contact for the designers. They are two different people. These companies have a large number of employees rather than an indie dyer where they are usually 1 to 2 people per business. That is a one person. So usually on an indie dyer, that person is hand dyeing the yarn. You can usually send them a message through their direct messages, or they might state in their profile, please send me an email. So when you want to approach these big yarn companies, I would highly suggest go to their website. Go see if they actually have a call for designers for submission. A lot of these times they'll have calls for a specific a theme or a issue that's going to be coming out that you as the designer can submit your idea. This would provide a sketch, a detailed review, as well as a swatch on what you would like to make with their yarn. If you go onto their website and they don't have a submissions call, you can go and search for if they have an email, as you, the designer, can email them. Now, don't email and say, hey, I want yarn. Here it is. You want to go in with an email and say, hey, my name is Julie, and I would absolutely love to work with you guys. I love your yarn, your brand, everything it stands for, whatever. And then you want to go and say, I have an idea for an amazing pattern with this yarn, and I think that it would look amazing with this type of project. Here is my sketch. Here's the idea that I have. It would take this much yarn. I hope to work with you guys. Please let me know, whatever, like I'm adding in the fluff, but you get the idea. You want to be able to provide them with, one, who you are, where they can find your patterns, what your idea is, and what yarn you would like to use from them. They may come back and say, thank you so much, but we don't have any openings right now, but we appreciate you reaching out. That can happen and will probably happen sometimes. And other times they may say, absolutely, that sounds amazing. Let us know more about it. Tell us more details. And you can get a conversation going. It is all about building relationships with the companies. It is two-sided. You always need to think that they are a company that are looking for benefit, and you are also a designer. So when you are wanting to approach these big yarn companies, have something in mind. Make sure that you know what you want to do. I would also suggest that maybe you come out with 1 or 2 patterns before you go and approach these big companies. Know who you are as a designer. Know what your brand is. Know what your followers want, and go from there. So I think that is key thing to look when you are wanting to collaborate with some amazing companies. Now that we kind of went through the most typical questions that I get, I want to bring you through kind of my designing process. So this is my process as a designer. Each designer is different and each person does this differently. But I've been asked a lot on how do I design, what goes through a typical design. So for an example for this, and I'm going to be taking this sweater as an example. I got inspiration as me and my husband were walking through the trails and with the winter trees. My friend Laura, who is from Camp Fiber Yarns, is the dyer behind this. I contacted Laura and said, hey, I have an idea for a sweater. Would you want to collaborate with me? She said, absolutely, of course. We had collaborated with these 2 colors before and I had them in my stash and they were just screaming to be this beautiful sweater. I had it imagined in my head and I knew what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted this blue as the main color and I knew I wanted these trees to pop. So I emailed her and I said, this is my idea. This is how much yarn I'll use. And we chatted back and forth. So once I finally received the yarn, I started sketching it out. I sketched out the exact look of the sweater that I wanted, and then I went to Stitch Mastery and I designed the yoke. The yoke is up here where you see a lot of the color work. So that was my first go, is how many stitches do I have and all of the details. From there, I took my own measurements that I have on my Excel sheet and I started grading the pattern. Now, I do this a little differently. I actually grade the entire pattern and write it out before I even start knitting. So I do up my gauge swatch, I go from there, and I grade the entire pattern. Some designers can just cast on and then they go. It stresses me out and I need to know that it will fit for every size. So I will actually do the math for every single size, including my own, for these sweater patterns. So I went to Excel and I did all of the math. I figured out where to cast on, how many stitches, the circumference. I used the Craft Yarn Council as a guide to know the average measurements of people of the different sizes. And I want to say that this sweater comes in 9 to 10 different sizes. The next step was to start getting it knit up. So I picked my needles, I picked the yarn that I was using, and I started knitting. As I was knitting, I decided to add in, it's hard to see, but I decided to add in some texture. So there's some little knit and pearls in the middle that I thought was really, really nice. These are all details that I added after. I wasn't sure how long I was going to do the sleeves. These are all designs that I wanted to do afterwards. I knew that this was going to be the yoke. I knew that I wanted it full length, but from there, that's where I was having fun and being inspired by the design that I was knitting. So I knit the entire sweater and I decided on a 3/4 length sleeve and I absolutely loved it. I loved the fit and I loved how it was working out. The next step was to put a call out to test knitters. I did this over on Instagram. I also did it on Ravelry. There's different forums that you can go on Ravelry for test knitters. I also put a call out on Instagram and I got test knitters for each size. My test knitting, sometimes it depends. Lately I've been doing them through Instagram chat. I sometimes do them through Slack, which is a free application, or you can do them through emails. There's different types and each designer has their own kind of way of doing it. So I sent it off to them, and I also sent it off before to my tech editor for them to look it over to let me know before I sent it off to my test knitters to make sure that the math worked, that there was no errors. And then the test knitters went at it. They got all of their samples knit, they knitted up, and now they send their notes back to me. This is where I sit down, I look through all of the testers' notes, and I make sure that the pattern is perfect. You also want to make sure that you take your photos. Me and my husband went out in the trails. It was actually on Christmas Day that we went out in the trails and took these photos. Our family were here. It was beautiful and it was snowing. It was the perfect day to take photos. So we brought our camera and we went out and we took the photos. I'll put a photo up here. So these were the ones that we used for the final version of the pattern. I decided to edit them in Lightroom and just kind of brighten up the photo, made sure that it was clear and crisp and you could really see the pattern. You want to make sure as a pattern designer that you are highlighting the pattern and not the person. The pattern is the highlight. You may look amazing in the photo, but what matters is how the pattern, the sweater, whatever you're knitting, that looks. And from there, I released the pattern. I sent out a newsletter. I made sure everything was set in my pattern. I did it on Ravelry. And that was it. Designing patterns takes months. From your idea to the actual finished item, I want to say this at least took 6 months. It's not usually something you can do, you know, within 2 weeks and this and that, unless it's like a small pair of mittens, a hat, or a sock. That sometimes you can do, but you want to give enough time for your test knitters, your tech editor, you to knit it up, and everything. So usually from start to finish, from the idea to the design, it can take anywhere between 6 months to a year, depending on the size and the complicated version of your finished item. So I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope I answered the most common questions as a knitwear designer. If I didn't answer your question, put it down below and let me know what questions do you have for me. I hope that I'm able to answer all of your questions. And if there's a lot of different, I may do a part 2 video. But thank you so much. And if you like this, make sure you like and subscribe to my YouTube channel where I upload this fun type of content for you all. So as always, happy knitting.